Good morning, girls. Today we're in chapters 4 through 6 of John, and we see a few stories in this gospel that we didn't see in Luke. And I love seeing stories about women, not necessarily because the women in the Bible are so great, but I love seeing the way Jesus interacts with the women in the Bible, because this is a culture that doesn't really value women. You don't hear from them. You don't normally see them. And Jesus has always valued women. He makes time for women. He supports and sticks up for women. He doesn't mind being interrupted by a woman and her emotions. But the story of the Samaritan woman is a little interesting because he goes out of his way to seek her, to speak with her. And Jews and Samaritans didn't speak to each other. They didn't get along with each other. So the fact that he purposely went into Samaria to seek out a specific woman is just so interesting to me. So let's look at her story in chapter 4, starting at verse 5. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. That detail is interesting because women usually went to the well early in the morning before the sun came out and it got super hot. They would go get water early in the morning. She goes at noon trying to avoid all the other women because she's shunned from society. She is known by her mistakes. So she tries to avoid the time where she knows everybody else would be there. She's hoping that nobody would be there. And she finds Jesus. So in verse 7, it says, when the Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? And she's like, are you talking to me? Because Samaritans and Jews did not get along with each other. They didn't speak to each other. So the fact that a Jewish man is speaking to a Samaritan woman, it was just really odd. So they start having this conversation, right? And then in verse 16, he tells her, go call your husband. And she says, I have no husband. And he said, you're right. You've actually had 5 husbands, and the guy that you're with right now is not even your husband. And I'm sure she was shocked and embarrassed, like, how does he even know this about me? And although an interaction like that would take us by surprise, it's beautiful that Jesus wants to get straight to the point, straight to the heart of the matter. He goes for the very thing that she is most ashamed about, and he's like, I want to talk about that. He wants to talk about her. She wants to give him excuses about why she doesn't worship and why she doesn't go to church. And he starts telling her in verse 23, yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. So he's basically saying, you can worship him anywhere. I want your heart. Basically telling her, I know exactly who you are. I know your mistakes, but I still want to have a conversation with you. I still want to have a relationship with you. And all I want is your heart. He wants true worshipers that worship with their spirit. Such a beautiful story. So not only does she come to believe, but she goes right back into her town, and now she wants to tell everyone. Before she was avoiding people, and now she wants to tell everyone about the Messiah that she met and spoke with her. So again, I've said this before and I'll repeat it again. He does not want to condemn us. He reveals to heal. He wants to show us the very thing that we want to keep hidden. He wants to bring it to light and reveal it so that he can heal that area of our lives. Such a beautiful story. And in chapter 5, we see the healing of the man at the pool of Bethesda. And again, he goes up to this man and says, do you want to be made well? And that man starts giving him excuses of why he hasn't been well, and it's because of other people, and other people are getting in his way. And we tend to do that, right? When we're stuck or we're not succeeding like we think we should, we start blaming other people for the reason that we are not successful. And in this story, we see Jesus's authority. We talked a lot about that when we were studying Luke. And in verse 8, it says, Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And when Jesus says something, it has to happen. All of nature obeys the word of Jesus. And usually when he says it with an exclamation mark like that, it's a command and it happens immediately. So verse 9, it says, at once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. When Jesus says something, it has to happen. There's a story in chapter 6 that we did see in Luke, but we saw it in a different way in Luke. And it is the feeding of the 5,000. So there's a crowd that follows Jesus to hear him speak. He's speaking for hours. And now everyone is hungry, but nobody has any food. So in verse 8 and 9, the disciples bring this boy that does have a little bit of food. He has 2 fish and 5 loaves. And Jesus starts taking that bread, breaking it, giving thanks, and it starts to multiply. And he's able to feed 5,000 men. It doesn't count women and children. Again, during that time, it was the man who was the head of the household. He was the representative of the household. So they counted 5,000 men. That doesn't include their women and children, which means it's maybe around 20,000 people that he fed with 2 fish and 5 loaves. What I love is verse 12, he tells them, when they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted. I love that God is extravagant, but never wasteful. He just fed 20,000 people, but he said, make sure you pick up the leftovers so that they are not wasted. The leftovers, just the leftovers, were 12 baskets. So each disciple was able to get a whole basket full of bread after they had served the people. And then the last story that we see in chapter 6 is Jesus walking on water. This story was not in Luke. So after Jesus fed the crowd, he tells the disciple to go to the other side on a boat and he will meet them there. While they're on this boat, a storm comes up and they see him walking on water towards them. And it says in verse 18, a strong wind was blowing and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water. And they were frightened, but he said to them, it is I, don't be afraid. I always underline when I see don't be afraid because it says it so many times in the Bible. Do not fear, don't be afraid, fear not. I always underline that when I see it. Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. So once he gets in the boat, everything else is figured out. That is such a great example for us to let Jesus into our situation, and that situation gets cleared up. So much good stuff in chapters 4 through 6. I'll see you next week for chapters 7 through 9. All right, girls, I'll see you then.